information. She's been with the Division of Forestry for a number of years, and she covers around the Cincinnati area. So at this time, Wendi, I'm gonna go ahead and let you take it away, and I'm gonna let you all know that this will be recorded for this session. All right, go ahead, Wendi. Thank you.
Thanks, Lola.
No problem.
So I do cover 14 counties in Southwest Ohio, which includes Montgomery County, which is the Dayton area. We're lucky enough to have the two people I do this project with, the Twigs to Trees, Susie Crable with Montgomery County Land Bank, and Adam Blake with County Corps. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Lola, you might wanna ask people to mute because I hear TV in the background and I don't have a TV on.
Is that?
All right. So basically, this came about because I had worked with Susie at the Kettering Parks Department when she worked for a city, and she had moved to Montgomery County Land Bank. We were talking about putting trees in vacant lots and trying to figure out how best this would work. So we talked a lot about it, and we came up with an idea that, you know, there's, I think Susie said 1,200 lots in just the last few years. It was just a lot of lots. And I used to work for the city of Cincinnati, and in those areas, the lots actually turn around relatively quickly. Not as quickly as some people hope, you know, 3 to 5 years, but, you know, relatively quickly. These lots did not have the likelihood of turning around to be rebuilt on in that amount of time. So we started having long talks about this, and, you know, I think probably like most of you, you know, we played in the woods, we explored and played and created, and, you know, as our cities developed, we lost those green spaces. And with these new vacant lots in the neighborhoods, we thought this might be an opportunity to turn some of those open spaces into native woods so that these urban forests can thread through the city and clean our air and water right in the places where we really need it most. And so cool green trees lower our blood pressure, calms traffic. There's so many socioeconomic benefits to having trees. And, you know, as a mom of a 12-year-old, I can tell you, if this new generation can explore the outside a bit more, unplug, all the better. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our process and how we do things. And if you can pull a few things out of it to work in Youngstown, all the better. So this is me. Lola's the blue region. I'm the light green region. My office is in Waynesville. There's Cincinnati and Dayton to give a perspective. But, you know, if you know Lola, what we do is we try to improve the quality of life through trees. So in Dayton, we had a problem. We lost a number of big industries, and with that, we lose population. The housing market changed, and we had a lot of declining houses, which then either were fixed up or tore down and became vacant lots, which are then transferred to the municipalities or townships. And I presume if you're on this call, you know as well as I do that these vacant lots can become hosts for invasive species, tree of heaven, honeysuckle, those sorts of things, as well as unwanted activity that can impact neighboring property values, from homelessness, even there's problems with meth labs in the honeysuckle of vacant lots. So there's a lot of good reasons to do something else with our vacant lots. When I was younger, I worked in Philadelphia and volunteered for Philadelphia Green. And there's a nice quote from Bob Grossman that talks about how when you have vacancy, it creates more vacancy. And if you work with vacant lots, you are familiar with this concept. So there is a cost to doing nothing. And you can ask Susie and Adam at the end of this when we answer questions, but I found that the hardest and longest part of the whole Twigs to Trees program was getting a buy-in from everyone involved and consensus and a process to move forward. You know, there are a lot of different parts. That's why there's no laundry list of how to do this exactly, because what works for us in Dayton isn't going to work for everyone. Just like when people mean well and they send me all sorts of articles from Chicago and Utah and Detroit of how they're dealing with their vacant lots, those were not things that would work for us. So this is just one way just to get your brain thinking. So I have a very strong opinion that urban forestry is not about trees. I presume most of you like trees, but trees are just a vehicle to build community. And that's really what we do with urban forestry. We're trying to build that sense of place and sense of connection to where people live. And that's what Twigs to Trees does. So, you know, there's no reason to reinvent a wheel. So we did begin by looking at what other towns were doing. First off, what I think everyone's doing to some extent is the traditional answer, which you just add turf and you mow it. But you'll find as time goes on with just an open lot where you mow it, there's problems with people dumping trash, like large truckloads, as well as driving through. And this can become quite an expense for a municipality. So this is, although simple, it can be expensive. And then the very first idea that Susie and I talked about was putting some landscape trees in these lots. You know, landscape trees, ball and burlap, containerized trees, you know, they're instant wow, right? They're big, they have an impact right away. There's a lot of feel-good reasons to do this, but they're expensive. They also take a number of years to establish. Anyone who's put in young trees, you can't just forget about them. You have to water them weekly from Memorial Day to Labor Day. You have to weed, you have to prune, you have to, you know, do all these things. So they're expensive to purchase, and you do need expertise to plant them to do it right. And I remember something that Susie said early on. She said, last thing I want to happen is for someone to drive by a lot and say, look, 3 dead trees, must be a Montgomery County, you know, land bank lot, right? So, and that's what happens when you just put trees in and forget about them. And you know, Susie's an arborist, I'm an arborist. We knew that's what would have happened. So we knew that wasn't right for us. Dayton does have a couple tree nurseries in their open lots, but it does take a lot of community involvement. And as time goes on, the city has found that those volunteers peter out. Within 5 years, they disappear. The other problem with developing tree nurseries is you have to have nursery skills to get a viable product at the end of your growth. It's not as easy as you think. And, you know, the only reason why Dayton has a successful program doing this is because their city forester, Mike Humston, has a nursery background and has all those skills and knowledge to do this right. If we didn't have Mike, this wouldn't have been a process. So, but even with all that, it's been harder and harder each year to keep their nurseries going. So we knew that this wasn't an option for us. A lot of people send me stuff about orchards, and I presume they're from people who haven't worked in an orchard. Orchards are a lot of work. There's pruning, there's spraying. You have to have a pesticide applicator's license. and you have to harvest the fruit. And this takes a whole staff. And volunteers don't work because volunteers help when they're available to help, not necessarily when the work needs to be done. So the orchards are a nice idea. I like the idea of providing fruit to neighborhoods, but they are a lot of work. And we decided this wasn't what we really wanted to do large scale. Although we did sneak some orchard things in, and I'm sure Susie can tell you about that at the end. Community gardens. I presume, well, I can tell you I've been a part of more than my fair share of community gardens. Anyone been a part of community garden? Everyone's out there in March, right? Right? April, we're out there. May, what happens in July? August? Yeah, nobody shows up. And it turns into a huge mess and you have to bush hog it. So, you know, this is a really work intensive thing to do with your vacant lots. Finally, something that a lot of people always want to talk to me about are putting in those prairie plants and wildflowers. Unfortunately, as you talk to people in their neighborhoods, this looks messy to a lot of the people, right? A whole lot of education has to come along with doing native plants. And if they're not there yet, this just looks unkempt. And you have to remember, you read articles about nonprofits coming in and doing tree work and following grant money to do things on vacant lots in the inner city. And if the neighborhood, if the people who live there don't want what you're doing, it's not going to be successful. And you'll find that that is often the case in native wildflower areas. Since Cleveland did a research showing the importance of getting alternative plant communities, there's a lot of benefits, all sorts of studies out there. If you're interested in knowing how this works, I'm happy, I'm the queen of over information. I'm happy to share it with you. But you know, there's lots of good studies that show that having trees in areas really do make us better. And we have to get involved in the urban forest because trees don't naturally just grow on their own. These trees here, they don't come just by miracle. They, you know, we have to put them there. And these vacant lots, the same thing. If we don't put the right trees in, what we get are tree of heaven and honeysuckle and maybe a box elder or two, but we really don't get the trees that we want to be a nice, healthy woodland. So that's why we have to manipulate that urban forest. We have to manage things and get involved. So why should we spend this time and effort to plant woods? Well, when we put healthy and safe trees in our communities, it's a much better place to live. We're healthier, we're happier, crime is lower. There's so many socioeconomic benefits to this. Large shade trees also mitigate stormwater loads. A lot of times in our cities, we have stormwater problems where there's flooding and those sorts of problems. Tree canopies slow that load down and can be a real asset to your gray infrastructure. Properties that have trees near them or on them are higher value than those properties without trees. Also, pocket parks near retail districts really make those retail districts more vital. So that's a whole talk in and of itself. I kept myself to one slide, but all sorts of reasons to plant trees. And once we got through with talking to everyone involved, the city, the nonprofits, everyone at the table, we came up with the idea that we needed to come up with something clean looking, but diverse. And since we were all tree people, we decided to go with trees to improve those vacant lots and control those related costs. Now we found that there's two different kinds of lots. In some of the older neighborhoods, they have lovely soil. They weren't built in these mass developments where they've scraped the soil, sold it, built the houses, you're on subsoil. You know, these are gorgeous, lovely soil areas. And in these areas, you can just plant seedlings and they grow lovely. So for those lots, we decided to put tree seedlings in and create woods. There are some areas that you can't put a shovel in, whether it's an old parking lot to a defunct strip mall, parking lots, malls that are defunct. You don't need to bust up the concrete, or, you know, if you can't get a shovel in, you can just do what we use in strip mining in forestry. In this, it's called end dumping or strip mine repairing. And in these areas where we have just destroyed the soil here in Ohio, we do a process called end dumping, where you dump the dirt. It can be actually pretty bad dirt. And we dump and dump and dump, and we don't drive over it. You keep it uncompacted. And you can see here on the hillside in Southeast Ohio how there's these bumps, right? And then what we do is we put the tree seedlings in there, and we pick really tough trees. I always joke that they're like junkyard dogs, right? So black locust, hackberry, sycamore, really tough trees. And then, you know, these are trees on a site that's just 6 to 7 years old. So they get big, right? Pretty quick. So this is another, you know, tool in our toolbox to handle areas that we want to plant. So one of our first sites and one of our toughest sites is this site here at Salem Avenue in Pittsburgh. It's in the Fort McKinley neighborhood of Harrison Township. And my memory, I grew up in the area, is that it was an old bread factory, and it's pretty much like a gravel hard pan. So it's a really hard place to grow. You can see a church off to the right has a community garden. And it was decided that the center would be kept open for like Frisbee and playing and so on. And so sites like this need site prep. Actually, all sites need site prep. So this is where some of your money comes in. You need to both get rid of your invasives, your honeysuckle and tree of heaven. Depending on how bad it is, will depend on how much it costs to have that removed. And then you can add organic matter like wood chips or leaves, and then and help prep the soil that way. I don't know how many of you have taken TCA with Lola, but I'm going to go through the recipe real quick, because basically what we're doing is we're adding air and water into the soil profile so tree roots can grow. Tree roots don't grow well in compacted soil because there's no air and water. This is Alan Seward, who is up in the Cleveland area, and he has a theorem that says as the roots go, so goes the top. The idea here is that if your roots are healthy, also, you know, the top of the tree is going to be fine. So it's all about getting that root space, you know, going. This is a soil profile of Ohio soil layers. That C layer is that subsoil that's really compact. That's often what we're working in. The A and B and O layer is what we call topsoil. And so there's a process called the recipe where you rip the subsoil, you bust it up 24 inches down. You then add 1 to 2 inches of compost or mulch or leaves or any sort of organic matter, and then you till it in the top 10 inches. And then you top dress with 1 inch of compost. And what you've artificially done is played Mother Nature. You have created the O, A, and C soil layering. And it looks like this. The first thing you do with a horrible plant site is you add air. That's the ripping. And then you add that 1 to 2 inches of compost. You till it. There's your new A site, A layer. And then you're going to add compost and mulch as a top layer. What this then does is, with time and rain, Mother Nature rains down through the O and A, the organic matter breaks down, leachates break down and go into that subsoil and creates that O, A, and B soil layer. And this is what our trees need to grow well. So this is that same site. The first time we planted it in 2018, we used glyphosate to kill the grass. It was a 8-foot wide rows. The rows were dominated by the deck of the mower. That's this entire pattern, and it was all just to make it easier for the mower to mow the trees and not run over our trees. So that green space is how wide the mowing deck is. So we put in, I believe, hawthorn, sycamore, and oaks. And you can see we use tree shelters and put in the trees. And we didn't have very good recovery. We didn't do a lot of the recipe beforehand, but the sycamores did well. So if you want to make sure that you have a success, sycamores are your go-to. And then what we did was Adam worked with a contractor and we did parts of the recipe to improve the sites. We went around, figured out which trees survived and which ones need to be replanted. And then we worked with Youth Build, which is Youth Build Dayton, which is a AmeriCorps group of young people who do job training. And they came out and planted our trees with us and put them in. And this time around, it went really well. We were really fortunate. We have a Montgomery County, beautiful, has a trailer with tools for us to use, and they partnered with us to make this able to happen. And when you put these trees in, I really want to encourage you to put in large shade trees. It's those large stature trees that are going to give you the benefits. A lot of folks want to put in shrubs, they want to put in evergreens, but you know, those large trees will make a big difference. But any tree is valuable. Trees are the only piece of urban infrastructure that increases in value. Everything else you put in, from benches to curbs to a building, the moment you finish it, it starts depreciating in value. Trees, when you put them in, they're the least valuable they're ever going to be. From there, they only go up. So the bigger the tree, the bigger the benefits. So when you put a large shade tree in, when you have more shade, you have more energy savings. When you have more canopy, you have cleaner air. When you have more leaves, you have it slows the stormwater load down. There's so many really good reasons to put trees in. Checking time. So this is the site that we did in Dayton, Dakota Avenue. It was the first one that I did with Susie. It was not just one site like Frank was talking about. This was multiple properties all in a row. And what we did the fall before is we figured out how wide the mower deck was, so it'd be very easy to mow. We killed all the honeysuckle, the tree of heaven, and then we set out the rows of the trees that we put in. And so this is the plot. You can see that there's a house, and then we had about 7 lots all in a row that we were able to plant on. Here you can see we got a sign up. That way everyone knows what we're up to and it makes sense to folks. And the way we did this was one of the biggest problems here was there was people driving through from the back apartments across the lot to the road. And so Susie put in a split rail fence in the back, and we put small at maturity trees by the road and by the back alley, and then we put large at maturity trees in the center. So then we came to the idea, like, do you plant seedlings or do you plant larger stock? And, you know, putting that larger stock is very attractive because it looks great right off the bat. But we went with the cheaper seedlings. They are only available in the spring, which is limiting. They do need protection. You have to put those tree shelters on, but they grow really fast once they get established. Once you go with the bigger trees, they need a lot more care to get them going. So here we are planting trees the day. It was Arbor Day. I believe even Mayor Nan Whaley came out and planted a couple trees herself. And you can see we planted the trees very close, closer than traditionally. And this is because we wanted to make sure that although the mower can get through to mow, we didn't want cars to be able to come through and dump trash. Also in forestry, you plant trees closer together to cause them to have limiting light factor to grow taller quicker, which is what we wanted. It helps with limiting how much pruning you have to do with them. So we put that small at maturity trees really close together, and then we had wider spacing with the larger trees. Excuse me. We did use native species. We have a fairly large list. We only did about 5 tree species per site, but we choose riparian area trees, tough trees that can handle a bit of abuse, and then other important trees that are native to our area. Some of the sites are sites that are too small with modern planning and zoning requirements to ever put a house back there. So with those sites, we talk about putting in evergreens to create a nice block between neighbors. And then there are times and places you'll see here in the future pictures where putting shrubs in makes a lot of sense. So they're all native. So here we are finishing up planting, and you can see we have a number of signage to keep everyone up on what we're doing. And this is that summer, and you can see in the tree shelters and even in the ones kind of like in the back, the sycamores are already growing out the top of those tubes just, you know, a few months later. So they're doing really great. If you have really big sites, like I think I heard Frank said he had 7 acres, you can get a mechanical planter. A lot of soil water conservation districts have these that you can borrow. So this is how they do it in reforestation efforts. But we did all of ours by hand, real simple. These are the diagrams you'll get from the ODNR seedling handout. They came in big bundles like this. They were dormant. They did not have leaves. And you planted them, then you put the stake in next to them, and then the shelter that was tied around them. And this seedling protection is really important. I presume you have deer in Youngstown. We have deer by us, definitely. Other wildlife, as well as a deterrent. If these tubes seem to block people from wanting to drive through the lots, which is an added benefit. So the trees are actually not the expensive part. Trees themselves are very cheap. What's expensive are these tree tubes, which are about $5 to $7 each. So this is where your investment's going to be. This is from a rehabilitation site up in Tip City, north of Dayton. And they didn't want to invest. They just wanted the trees. They were cheap part, and they didn't want to put the tree shelters in because they were so expensive. And these are 7-year-old oak trees. And you can see every single year the deer eat the oak trees. And every single year the oaks try to sucker up and survive. And then every year the deer come back. So if you want trees to grow big, you need to just go ahead and buy those tree shelters and use them. And a lot of times when I talk to folks, they don't, they want the easiest thing possible, that they don't have to do anything. But even if you put trees in, you still have to take regular maintenance. Anything alive needs care. So with long-term management of these lots, there's mowing and controlling weeds. The idea is that we'll create shade and then the grass won't grow so much. So we hope that there's less mowing, maybe with 3 mows a year and maybe 2 times walking around with the backpack sprayer, killing the tree of heaven and the honeysuckle. You also have to do young tree structure pruning. Lola, I'm sure, does those around your area, and that gets a nice center leader and gets the trees growing up. Invasive plant control, which you just have in the city, and watering. Seedlings small seedlings need less watering than large trees, but if we have a drought year, you'd still have to go out there and water. So cost, that's always what people ask. It's kind of complicated because it depends on a number of your decisions along the way. But with $6 per tree, that's the shelter plus the tree, times 436 seedlings per acre, which is about 10 trees, 10-foot centers, you're looking at $2,616 per acre. That's all that. That's not counting planting. That's volunteer planting. If you decide with a B&B or container planting, you're looking at $50 to $200 per tree. The labor of putting the tree in, you're looking at closer to $10,000 to $15,000. So where do you get seedlings? No, we in Ohio don't have a nursery any longer, and no, we're not likely ever to have one again. So I did send a list ahead. I like to support our local soil water conservation district. They have a seedling sale each year. It's important to support your local sister agencies, especially for seedlings under 100 trees or less. If you're going to do huge quantities, you can do your own bulk order directly from the private companies or the state departments. Kentucky and West Virginia happily sell to us. Indiana and Pennsylvania sometimes do, but not too, sometimes they don't. I don't always understand. I buy from Kentucky because we're right down here near them. And then taking care of your seedlings. I've had folks buy seedlings and they just kept it in the bag until they opened up the morning of the planting, and you can't do that. They're alive. So there's some rules when ordering seedlings. First off, you can start ordering your seedlings for spring in October and November. You should absolutely have your seedlings ordered before the end of the year. If you wait to order in February and March, you're just going to end up with the dregs. You're going to end up with whatever's left, and you're not going to have any choices. So planning is the big part of doing this right. Make sure you put your order in starting next month. Those seedlings that are shipped to you, a lot of times at your, you can decide when, usually in February, March, or April. And then those seedlings should be planted within a week of arrival. Go ahead and open up the package, keep them cool, keep them moist, and keep them in a shaded space. If you need any resources, let me know. Here with Dakota, we had a different tree species for each row, and this is how we made sure that the right trees got in the right row. You can see here we planted serviceberry, sycamore, tulip poplar, another row sycamore, and Washington hawthorn. And we just use simple tools, shovels, gloves, boots. This was another site we planted on Michigan Avenue in the Fort McKinley neighborhood. It had an old house on the site, and we were just trying to fill it up. And this was what it looked like before planting. And this is what it looked like. And you can see that's pretty much the width of it. It was a fairly small area. And this was a year later. You can see how big the trees had gotten. We were out there trying to figure stuff out because we had heard that they were interested in putting a house there. And that's the cool thing about putting seedlings in, right? You can take the shelter off, use it again, and you know, that's the biggest win we could have. If someone shows up and says, hey, we're going to cut down your trees and put in a new house in this area that really needs some new development and new life, that's wonderful. And I don't get mad at that at all. That's great. And you can see after a year how well these trees were doing. They were growing wonderfully. You can't see here, but they were taller than me. And I'm not tall, but not short. There are times that we've used planting containers. Containerized trees are not in dirt, they're in planting medium, right? So in that planting medium, it is lighter than balm burlap. And this is a picture of down in Hamilton County. They did a reforesting of lawned areas at their parks. And you can see how they did it. They did containerized trees with T-bars and turf reinforcement plastic with zip ties. And that's how they did theirs. And then what they did was they used their native wildflower mixes and filled in the area in between using those wild flowers and prairie mixes. And it's really important to get those trees planted right, the containerized trees. It takes a lot longer to put in those containerized trees, but it's important to do it right. You need to have that flare right at the base, or else the trees won't grow well. You also need to cut off any encircling roots that are at the edge of the container. And Lola has specs for how to plant trees that she can share with you if you're interested. From here, I was told you wanted to see some before and after pictures. I haven't taken any pictures this year, but here's a couple of the sites that we've done. In a majority of the neighborhoods involved, and they have a lot to say. And but this particular neighborhood, none of the neighbors wanted to purchase it, which is an option. And there wasn't a whole lot of community involvement with this site. So what we did with this corner site is we planted the trees pretty close together. With seedling plantings, you can do about 8-foot to 10-foot spacings, but you'll see here, we planted them a lot closer because we interplanted in between. They weren't done with volunteers, they were done with a contractor, and so we had a bit more control over how it would work. So we did large hickories and oaks. Those are the ones with the tubes, and then they were interplanted with shrubs like I believe hazelnut and maybe a hawthorn. I can't remember offhand, but so we planted it pretty heavy to make sure that this lot would fill up. I'm not the only one who believes that trees are just a vehicle to build community. Probably most of you have heard about the Arbor Day Foundation. Everyone benefits when elected officials, volunteers, and community citizens make smart investments in the urban forest. You know, getting folks involved and caring about their neighborhoods, just huge. And trees are that tool in your toolbox that can solve a lot of different kinds of problems. For instance, this is a site called Hawkwall Avenue, and this neighborhood was very interested in community gardening and food forestry. So this site on the other side had another empty lot, and they put in raised beds for there. And then this site, you can see we put in pawpaw and persimmon and food, trees that you harvest and eat from, and then didn't need a lot of chemicals to get something out of. And all of these sites were planted pretty close to the sidewalk. That way we didn't have dumping. But you'll also see on each of the sites in the plans, each of the sites have a easy in and easy out for those mowers to get through, and a very convenient pattern to mow well. Because when your properties have trees, you'll find that the rentals go down, home ownership goes up. Also, property value is 10% higher in those neighborhoods with trees in the front yards. So, if you have a $100,000 house, that's, $10,000, that's not too shabby. Also, empty lots with trees actually are more valuable than those without. So if developers in an area, the likelihood of them developing on a lot with trees is much higher, which seems counterintuitive, but is how it seems to go. So, so part of this could be just filling those properties with trees to attract those developers to put houses in and not have those trees. It's really okay. This was a neighborhood on Maitland Avenue. The neighborhood, I believe, were interested in having like a market area or an area where they could gather. So we didn't fill the whole area up. It was set in a way that would create shade eventually, but still allows areas to allow for use. And there was an alley in the back, and I believe there were hazelnuts planted all along there to sort of deter the driving through. And trees have a big impact on transportation. When people drive around, they prefer to see trees on the roadside. It also extends the pavement life of your blacktop. You'll also find that people will drive slower and they are less stressful. It's traffic calming to have trees along the roadways. And you'll also find those areas where they're talking about the need for speed bumps. If you put trees along each of the side of the road, people will just naturally slow down because their field of vision comes together. Trees also mitigate stormwater loads. So if you have flooding in a city, which is very common, tree roots both absorb the water, so there's not as much water. Also, the canopy slows the amount of water for those overtaxed sewers. So many great reasons to use trees to mitigate stormwater. This was a site in Fort McKinley between houses, and there was lots of trash. It looked like people parked there and left litter. So we had just a few trees left over from one of the plantings, so we planted them along the front. Then the following year, when we went back and planted, we filled it up the rest of the way. And, when you put trees in, even between houses, trees really help us feel cooler, and also lowers use of energy to keep your houses cooler, which saves everyone money. Our cities have heat island effects. So when you have more trees, the air is cooler. It also helps with cleaning out the air particulates, so we're healthier and happier. Alwaldy Avenue in Dayton, I believe this site was over by a railroad, and that helps with sound dampening. Trees do all sorts of great things for our mental health. That helps children when they have views of trees from their schools. They have lower rates of ADHD. Also, self-discipline raises, so they have higher levels of concentration and less impulsive behaviors. Just our kids are just so much healthier when we have trees around them. And everyone has a much better ability to cope when they have somewhere green and cool outside to go to. Also, when you have trees in a hospital area or senior center, it reduces the amount of hospital visits, as well as people heal quicker from surgeries so they can go home sooner. And it just strengthens our communities. When we have cool, shaded areas in our neighborhoods, we're more likely to be outside and we're more likely to get to know our neighbors. And we feel safer. There's studies that show that where you have trees, you have lower vandalism and lower domestic violence crimes. There's a study in Cincinnati that shows that as Cincinnati lost their ash trees in that 5 to 10 year period, crime dramatically went up in those areas. So, there's a direct correlation to trees and crime. Finally, you don't need a lot of trees to make a big difference. This is Burkhart Avenue. And I think these trees were just, you can see 10 trees, and we put it across the front to mitigate the dumping. And it makes all the difference in the world. Finally, we've been trying to do some forest gardening, which is using fruit and nut trees, native stuff, to these lots to have food available in many of these areas, which are food deserts. So I got through all my slides within my hour. So if Lola, you want to open things up to questions, and also bring Susie and Adam up to presenters so they can answer some questions too, that would be great.
There were a couple questions about the shelters. Wendy, how long do you keep them on? What are they made of? I didn't try to answer those because I thought I'd let you describe that.
Sure. So most of the time, tree shelters should stay on for about 3 years. If they don't get abused, you can use them again. And what they're made out of depends on what you buy, right? So Susie, ours were made out of like a corrugated UV, like plasticky material, right? And very likely we'll be able to use those for at least 10 years, would you say, about-ish? Maybe more depending on how abused they get. But I have seen tree shelters be more cardboardy, and they sell them as, well, they degrade and you don't have to take them off. But I have seen that you still need to take them off because there's ties and so on. So yeah.
And we used the Plantra. It was the name brand of what we used. And the big advantage to that, they're a little more pricey, but they have a fiberglass pole versus a wooden stake, which if you've used the tubes with the wooden stakes, even the best wooden stake, after about 2 years, they break off. And then your tree shelter is laying at a 45 or even laying on the ground, which doesn't do anybody any good. The Plantra fiberglass host is just wonderful.
Yes.
To me, it was worth the extra money and easily used multiple times.
Yeah, and we got that recommendation from Dr. Carolyn Kiefer, who does a lot of work planting American chestnuts as part of the American Chestnut Society. So that's where we had gotten that advice. Yeah.
So I just want to interject real quick. Tubes seem expensive, but when you're thinking about a single family lot that you might be doing, maybe you're investing $50. You're thinking of a larger lot where you're already going to have to amend the soil or anything else. It's not a huge expense, and it reaps rewards as I've seen, I've had to take tubes off because the trees are growing so fast, or the exact same species on another lot is going to take 3 or 4 years to have that tube.
Yep. So let me introduce real quick. This is Adam. He's with County Corps. He did a lot of the work with me in with the youth build group. So if you have questions about that, or the sites we did in the Fort McKinley, and then Susie works in the Dayton area. So make sure you ask them good questions, because I'm so glad they're here. Yay. What else we got for
And
questions?
Wendy, what we're going to do is, I know that there's a couple people that had questions and stuff. For instance, Gwen, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask Wendy the question directly. And then for, if you do have a question, just let me know, and then I'll have you unmute so you can go ahead and ask her and she can speak directly to the question. Gwen?
I already answered, or you already answered my question about the shelter, the tree shelters. Thank
Okay.
you.
There's another question about what fruit and nut trees have been successful. What we ended up doing fruit tree wise was plant peaches and pears. Peaches and pears, is that right? I think that is. I know we did peaches.
Yes, peaches and
That
pears.
seems bizarre to me. But to me, peaches were always, an iffy crop. The late frost would take them out and you wouldn't have a crop. But we toured a site in Baltimore at a land bank convention who had used peaches, and they said we did nothing to them. No spraying. Like the fruit trees are prohibitive to use them for that reason. But with the peaches and pears, they did nothing to them. Recognized they were going to have, not perfect fruit, and they have done wonderfully. Yes, every other year, whatever, once out of 3 years, they get a late frost and don't have much of a crop. Overall, it's worth it. So that's why we went with those fruit tree choices. Now, we actually had to buy like Stark Brothers, which are costly, $30 to $40 a tree. So we didn't plant very many of those because of cost and because of we're not real sure we're going to like having them there or not. It's all kind of an experiment on those food forest lots. Otherwise, we planted nut tree wise a whole lot of hazelnuts. We usually put those on the perimeter. They're a smaller multi-stemmed shrub, I guess. So we used a lot of those, and we used a lot of hickory nuts, and there's walnuts coming up. What else, Wendy? Do you remember? I think that's about it.
Yeah, walnuts and hickories. I think shell barks, they're really, really tough and they're edible. Just stay away from bitter nut, bitter nut, not delicious.
Yeah.
And then we did persimmons, but we weren't successful. Like they all died.
We have, I think we've planted about 100 persimmons in 3 years, and I think we have 3 alive right now. They've been tough. Yeah. So, and we did the nuts and fruit in the areas that are really hard hit food deserts, and in areas that have a real good neighborhood association to get a children's garden going, and it just seemed to be, hopefully will be a good fit for everybody. We didn't just put it somewhere and say, good luck. There should be people to take care of it. Who maintains the sites after they're planted? That's a good question. Right now, the land bank is holding on to the properties we've had. Adam is, I believe, doing the same, unless you can get a house built on some of them.
Real quick, Susie, so you have to think really big about these projects, and you probably want to try to leverage this with something else that's already going on in the neighborhood. And in a particular neighborhood where you saw Wendy show some slides of that larger lot, that's a 12-block neighborhood. We got involved in that neighborhood because the church was just doing an amazing job of reaching out and providing supportive services in there. There were a lot of vacant, abandoned lighting properties in that neighborhood. We were able to convince the county to expend some CDBG funds to do targeted demolitions in that neighborhood. And then we applied for funding through the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to build 25 homes. But we still ended up with about 15 vacant lots plus that large parcel that you saw. So the neighborhood's really been revitalized with new housing, and then we're leveraging that with the things like doing the Twigs for Trees program. So it's really important when you think about this to think about it really strategically and what other things you can bring to that neighborhood that will further your impact that you're going to have. The sites that we own in the neighborhood, we have contracted with a nonprofit that supports a school in the neighborhood that they do the mowing for us. So that's just kind of another level where if you have to pay to have the vacant lots that you're trying to do something with, if you're paying to have them maintained anyway, maybe you can find a nonprofit that you can support somehow that will do that maintenance for you. So in our case, we would pay a commercial landscaping company to maintain those lots. In this particular case, we're paying a nonprofit that's putting that money back into programming in the community.
On the land bank lots, we were given, as part of the demolition program, we were given funds for 3 years to do mowing. We're given $400 a year to do mowing, which that's about as minimal as you can get. So we have a contractor that does that. As far as the watering and the spraying and stuff, we've done no watering whatsoever. I remember the first lot that we planted it, had good water or good soil, water in the soil when we planted them. Then we had like 60 days with no rain. And I thought, there is no way they're going to live. And I'm not watering them because this is an experiment. I had to like pull myself back because my common sense tells you should have watered them when you planted them. We didn't even do that. So they've gotten no additional water at all. And on that site, the first year we had 90% survival rate after those conditions. So nobody has done any watering on these. And then after 3 years of ownership, or whenever the land bank gets in the position that we want to sell it to someone, or it goes back to the city will start mowing the lots. And they were instrumental in determining how it was designed. And so it's their design, their input that helps us make it easy for them to mow at this point.
Right. So it was a give and take. They were at the table. They told us how big their mowing decks were, how they do their program, and we made sure that each of the plans accommodated them. And it was a win-win for them, as if they didn't have dumping, which is very expensive to clean up, they decided it was worth mowing around trees. So, yes. Are there any other questions? Susie, you see any?
I answered one about the spacing. Why do we put them so close together? And we do that, especially the outer 2 or 3 rows. A vehicle is usually 8 to 10 feet wide. So we make sure that they're spaced about like a car is. And then the first row is here and the second row is staggered behind them. So when you look at them, instead of an 8-foot opening, there's like 4-foot opening. So it sort of gives the impression of a fence. And I'm someday not going to be able to say this, but I still can to this day. No one has ever driven over our posts, our tubes. They could drive right over them. It's not going to hurt their vehicle, but nobody's done it because I think psychologically it's like, there's something there we're not going to mess with because we don't know what those white things are. and might hurt our car, we're just gonna leave them alone. So nobody has messed with them yet. And
To Susie's point, the large lot that Wendy showed earlier, when we did the demolition, there was it was actually a dairy, not a bakery, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. And it had become a vacant building that was full of drug use and a lot of horrible things. Anyway, we got it torn down. We put the lot back together, put in some monitoring wells because there was some contamination on the property. And then we had, when we were finished, we're like, well, what are we going to do to keep people from driving through this lot? So we simply got old telephone poles and laid them down all around the perimeter of the lot. Well, that was fine, and I think it worked, kind of. I saw some tracks in there where people had just driven over the telephone poles. But interestingly enough, after we did the project, the planning, someone actually came and stole, if you can believe this or not, in an urban area, they stole all of the telephone poles. And I don't even want to get into how that's even possible, but they did. And I'm probably 10 poles, 16, I don't know. But once we did
Not the trees.
Once we did the planning with the tubes, no one has driven through that lot.
Yep.
So I just find that fascinating.
Question for you. When you all looked at these projects and stuff, did you actually have a chance to talk to some of the neighbors around those areas? And if so, how did that work out for you?
That's the most important part of the project.
Yeah, that's actually my note number one. And Susie, I'm sure will confirm this. Number one, engage with the neighborhood. The church, the neighborhood association, the people that are standing out on their front porches watching the traffic go by, they're fascinated by what you're doing. And if you engage with them before you do it, they'll support what you're doing. I have found that adjacent neighbors to individual lots where we've planted trees are watering the trees. They are calling me. The other thing is for those neighbors to have a point of contact about your project. So they're calling me when they find out somebody's parking on the lot or somebody's dumping on the lot. We've had, prior to this program, some of these vacant lots, I would end up having to pay to remediate 200 tires being dumped on one of my lots. And that's not cheap. And we're a nonprofit. So it's this idea of planting seedlings on vacant lots is a win, 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 win.
And we're finding, Wendy and I gathered some trees yesterday that we'll be planting this fall and next spring. And Wendy asked me where our next projects are going to be. And I have a couple ideas, but honestly, it's wherever stuff gets dumped during the winter, and clean it up. It's like, we're not going to pay for that again. We're going to put trees in to eliminate the dumping. That's what drives where my next treated twigs, Twigs to Trees program lot is. And I can justify doing it because I spent $800 or $1,000 to get everything hauled away. I can spend $500 to $600 to eliminate the problem, or at least mitigate the problem.
Mitigation is a good tool.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, having the ability to mitigate is a good tool to have and to kind of utilize in the community, especially when you have these types of projects going on in your community. Because again, buy-in, being able to mitigate, keeping the focus on what you're trying to do and stuff, and deterring some of the bad elements. Because it sounds like with all you all are doing in your respective areas, it's reducing crime to a certain degree. It's providing a opportunity to improve the quality of life around those neighborhood, plots and different things like that. So I think that that is a good motivator and a very good incentive to be able to do that and stuff. So the more that you can do and the more you can engage folks in those areas, you're right, you're going to have somebody really there to support that program or that project. Sorry about that, Adam. Go ahead.
No. I hope everybody connects with Lola about Tree Commission Academy. It's important that people do this. Take that class that are interested. And I hope I didn't speak out of turn, Lola, but I threw you right under that bus.
That's all right.
The other thing is some of the lots that we planted on needed no amendment, and the trees have thrived. And what I've noticed is those are kind of the single lots where you're kind of surrounded by trees and there's some partial shade. They do really, really well with seedlings. The other thing I just wanted to get in before we end the meeting is there are programs like the Youth Build program, AmeriCorps, a lot of other programs. They have to do community service. They are always looking for projects to participate in. And if you can put together a relatively robust tree planting program, they would love to engage because you can do an education component with the Youth Build program and they can get a certification. And Youth Build is all about getting certifications to build a resume so you can become somebody that's employable.
Come on.
I have to agree with Adam. The Youth Build kids were wonderful. Sorry, they weren't kids, young adults. And then it was really fun because I had followed them on Instagram and they were all doing videos talking about how they had planted trees and how much fun that was. And I don't know, that's like part of the fun part of our job, right? Getting kids excited about being outside and doing something new and seeing their neighborhood in a different light. So yeah, absolutely make those connections.
One real fast question I have: the tubes, the shelters. Where can I get like one or two? Like if I wanted to put one or two on my lot, where could I get them?
I have seen them at garden centers, like not at like big box stores, but I've seen them at like nice, good sized garden centers, places that you buy things. How about anyone else? Anyone else seen them? I've seen them forestry supply stores. We have a couple like A.M. Leonard's and
Okay.
we have a number of them down here. I presume you have something equivalent up by you.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, I checked. I couldn't find it. I will check again. That's stupid. I should just go online is what I should do. Okay. All right.
A.M. Leonard in Piqua. It's called amleo.com. They have them on there, and they're maybe not as substantial as what we had, but they'll work for 4 or 5 years easily.
A.M. Leo on okay, is that in Piqua, Ohio, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
PIQUA.
I understand. Okay, PIQUA. Are they online?
Yes.
Okay, online. Okay, thank you.
I'm pretty sure you'll be able to narrow down some,
Yeah, I will eventually.
now that you know what you're looking for and stuff. Well, we're coming up on our time.
I'd like to ask a question.
Oh, sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
Okay, I don't know. I have 2 questions. One is that on the lot where we're planning to plant trees, it's was seeded to orchard grass, and there's a good stand of orchard grass. And our intention was not to mow it, but to plant into the orchard grass with some Roundup circles or something in there, and leave the orchard grass grow as a cover crop. I noticed in all of your plots that you showed us, they were spaced so that mowing could take place. Have you done anything with leaving some sort of cover crop grow without mowing it?
So if
Go
you
ahead,
talk to your neighbors, a lot of times that leaving the grass long looks messy
Yeah,
and does not look attractive, and it looks neglected, and that has a look and feel that neighbors don't want to have. So I think that is something you absolutely need to work with your neighborhood about. Susie, Adam, have you talked to folks about leaving things long or?
I haven't. One of the requirements that we have is it does have to be mowed with some frequency during the year. So we haven't been allowed to let it go long. But I would think when you're trying to get them established, you can't have competition from the grass. But once they're in, a couple of years in, and if you had clover or grass or anything, I think that would be fine because it does offer a little bit of cover for the root area.
it has two things. One, it's cover for the growing trees, but it also discourages deer browsing and that sort of thing too. The other question I have about deer browsing is that all of your plantings that you showed us had tubes. They were planted in tubes. Have you tried in the real urban areas? The deer pressure may be minimal. Have you done any planting, direct planting in these areas?
We have deer. We have deer everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay.
Yeah. And then you might need to check with your city ordinances. You might have rules that say you can't have grass longer than a certain.
Yeah, I think that in this case it's okay. And we don't have many neighbors there. There's only 2 or 3 houses in the area, so we'll see. But that reduces the cost. It has some other advantage for the trees as they're growing. So well, I was just wondering if you had experience on that.
So yeah, my experience is we have deer everywhere. I have deer rub on middle of Cincinnati, middle of Dayton. Maybe you guys have more hunters by you. I'm not sure, but we have plenty of deer.
No, we don't. There's deer around. The other question
It's Ohio. We all have deer.
We all have deer. Yeah.
A deer here, a deer there, deer everywhere.
Yeah.
Lauren, you say you have one more question?
I thought I had one more, but I'll let it pass.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our, thank Wendi for her wonderful presentation. And I want to thank Susie and Adam for bringing the support and being able to filter questions for this area. And I just want to let you know that 2 weeks from now, we're doing another session with Jim Chatfield, and it's going to be on what's bugging your plant and stuff. So it'll be a lot of information, another opportunity to come and join us and share your evening. So thank you. And we're going to go ahead on and say, have a great day and a great evening. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Lola. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Lola.
Thank you,
Thank
Wendi,
you.
and others.